Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our next guest should have been on the programme before. It's taken our time to getting around to chatting with him. He is a journalist and author. And his book, Rabbit Hole, A Satanic Ritual Abuse Survivor Story, has been incredibly well received and has received remarkable reviews. He can be found at davidshurter.com. I'll tweet out his details so that you'll have them. Get onto his website, because his website is updated daily with information about historic child sexual abuse and satanic ritual abuse. And many of the people David has spoken to in his investigations have appeared on this programme as well. People like Fiona Barnett and others. He's not too far from the great city of Seattle. We have a lot of time for Seattle, grunge rock fans, as that we are. Let's welcome to the show for the first time, David Shurter. David, welcome. How are you?
Hey, thank you, Richie. Thank you for having me. I'm great, actually.
And you got to be a grunge rocker not too far from Seattle. You must have been a Nirvana, Soundgarden fan, surely.
I love Seattle. I came from Nebraska. It's having a snowstorm today, and it's double digit below zero. So Seattle, I love the music scene. Actually, of all the places that I've lived in my life, this is my favorite. So
yeah, but you're a Nebraskan. You're a native of Nebraska, of course. I should have mentioned that as well. It is great to have you on. Finally, our paths were bound to connect at some stage, because on this program we're trying to be rational about looking into this particular issue of child sex abuse and satanic ritual abuse without ever being sensational. Something that your book has managed to do incredibly well. It isn't sensational, it's fact based. Of course, your opinions are in there. Of course, because of your own story and what happened to you. But and the way you tackle it on your website as well is brilliant. You take a journalistic approach to it. It's massively, massively important, David. I think it's the biggest single issue that the elites, governments, whatever you want to call them, are trying to keep a lid on, because I think they fear the whole system, the whole house of cards will collapse if people understand the levels to which this has reached. Do you want to tell our listeners your own circumstances, how you came to write Rabbit Hole, a little bit about your own story, and then we can talk about other stories and some of the other cases around the world?
Okay. I wrote Rabbit Hole probably, I'd say about 8 years ago. When I wrote Rabbit Hole, it was actually just for myself. I sat down to write out my life story, because I had spent a lot of my years trying to tell myself I was crazy and what I remembered couldn't possibly happen. And so I decided I wanted to see it in black and white. I was born into a family who was in a group in Omaha, Nebraska. They were Luciferians. The difference between Satanism and Luciferianism is that Satanism is simply a going against organized religion. Luciferians, however, believe in the Antichrist. They believe that there's going to be a war with heaven. They've sided with the devil. And Satanists can be just normal people who have been hurt by the church or who don't believe in it. Luciferians as a whole are all pedophiles, and they all kill kids in rituals that basically are to gain favor with demons. And I had 3 older siblings. My family was heavily involved with this already. My mother went into labor with me Thanksgiving night. They parlayed my birth until December 6th. So I was born December 6th, 1966. The 3 sixes was heavy. 3 sixes were very important in my birth date. And I was raised by this cult to believe that I was going to be the Antichrist. You mentioned Fiona Barnett. The interesting part about Fiona Barnett is that I've started working with her about 2 months ago. We've known each other about 2 months. And in our conversations, what we have realized is that she is the female version of what I was raised to be the Antichrist. She was raised to be a grand dame. And For those who are interested, just this morning, Fiona came out with a documentary, and that is, I just posted it on my blog today, and it's well worth the watch.
Absolutely right. I can second that. Go to davidshurter.com. And David, now that you mentioned Fiona, some of the things Fiona described to us on this program, some of the things that she witnessed, child hunting parties where people would hunt children to kill them as you would hunt deer or rabbits or some other game. That resonates with you. You understand that, don't you? That those horrible, horrific things, you understand her. You understand that she's telling the truth when she says those things.
Everything. I've never met anybody like Fiona. She mirrors much of what I went through. She's, again, the female version, so our abuse wasn't exactly the same. I was involved with child hunting parties as well. The difference, I think the main difference between her and I is that this cult basically raised me to grow up. They were hoping I would become a psychopath. And a perfect example of that is something Fiona and I were in an interview the first week we got together. And we started talking, the conversation came up about necrophilia, because necrophilia is a big thing involved with this group as well. And suddenly I had remembered something that I have spent my entire life running away from. But some of the abuse that I went through was that I was forced to murder young boys. And this is all below the age of 10. Can
I just ask you to repeat that now? Because I always say this to our guests who are on for the first time. This is not like your regular independent radio show. This goes out on commercial radio as well. Some of our listeners will never have heard anybody say anything like this on the radio before. So to clarify, you were forced to participate in the murder of children when you were a young boy.
I was forced to be involved in so many murders. I can't tell you how many children were murdered. Some of them at my father's hand. My father was a high priest. I was supposed to take his place. And so all below the age of 10, I was forced to murder boys. Some of those times I was forced to murder boys, and then I was forced to have sex with their corpse. And
David,
like
who were these? Who were? I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear this because I've heard this now from several people. Who were these boys, these children? Where did they come from?
All over. There was a huge child abduction ring that was going on. My father was a child abductor. Omaha at the time was basically centralized in the United States. They rerouted all of the Greyhound buses. So if you went from New York to LA, you had to go to Nebraska. You had to go into Omaha, Nebraska. There were also boys from Boys Town, which is a huge Catholic organization that was a boys' home. For those people who are not familiar with this, there is a British documentary out there called Conspiracy of Silence.
There certainly is.
It was supposed to be viewed on the Discovery Channel. The day that they were going to air it, the Republican Party paid the Discovery Channel $500,000 to pull it. And so from what I understand, it went out on the East Coast. It was viewed once, but they pulled it from national distribution. But there were copies that were sent out and now consequently can be seen on YouTube. There is a man in that documentary by the name of Alan Bear, and he was heavily involved with me as a child. And then as a young adult, I went to go move back to Omaha to help take care of my mother. And they kind of ingratiated themselves into my life. Once again, that's a lot of what my book is about, is this cover up of, it wasn't just.
David, can we just remind our listeners about Boys Town? Now, our listeners would have heard me speaking with Nick Bryant, who wrote a book called The Franklin Scandal about Lawrence C. King, the Franklin Credit Union scandal, and how that was related to Boys Town Orphanage, and boys were being taken out of there and they were being flown all over the country. And at the heart of this was a very, 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 very connected Republican, a black man called Lawrence E. King, a guy who sang the national anthem at very big Republican conventions, a man who was close to Ronald Reagan. This is all true, by the way. None of this has been disputed. David described the documentary that was made about this. World in Action were going to show this as well in London. ITV's World in Action, but it was pulled. All of this is true. All of it. None of it can be disputed. This is horrendous stuff, this. You see, David, until I met Nick Bryant a few years ago, I would have thought that people like you and Fiona Barnett and others were fantasists, that something very bad had happened to you when you were children, but that you had not dreamed it into something else or imagined it into something else, but some sort of psychosis had occurred and you were off the mark. I understand now completely that people like you have experienced what you've described. So I just wanted to mention that Boys Town thing again, because again, tying the dots or connecting the dots for some of our listeners may not remember or may not have heard of Nick Bryant in his book or Lawrence E. King, but all of this happened. Everything that David said there is absolutely 100% right. So I just wanted to jump in there and say that. Go ahead.
The situation that happened in Omaha was connected all the way up to the first Bush White House. And the time that you're talking about Lawrence King singing was George Bush's first inauguration. He sang at the inauguration. And so they were heavily connected. It was done by incredibly rich people. Harold Anderson ran the Omaha World Herald. He was involved. Warren Buffett, we all know him as the billionaire, famous billionaire. He was heavily involved.
How do we know? How do we know that now? If I had an editor or a producer, he or she'd be screaming at me now, "Get him off the air! He's naming people that are alive. This is incredible." How do we know Buffett was involved? Now, I've heard this a lot of times, by the way, but how do we know he was involved?
The thing about it is that Omaha was such a small town, and this is how I relate it. Omaha is still a small cow town. It's a small town. It doesn't have a huge population, at least Omaha. I mean, if you include the suburbs, but it was a very small town. There was so much going on. How do you expect the richest man in America, and at one time he was one of the richest in the world, especially at the time, how could he have stayed ignorant as to what was really going on in Omaha, Nebraska? Now, I know that Warren Buffett was involved because he was part of the cult that I was involved with. He was involved with trafficking of children and killing children and having sex with children. And that's why this has been basically kept under wraps, because people have a tendency to think that the rich and powerful are like these deities. You know, they come out of nowhere, they do their business, and they go back to nowhere. They don't really exist on Earth. And that's not true. They put their pants on just like we do. They go to the bathroom just like we do, you know. And the thing about it is that they're very, very highly connected.
I must jump in now at this stage in the interest of fairness. You know, to say that Warren Buffett has never been arrested or he's never been interviewed under caution or charged with anything. And
you there?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Have we lost each other momentarily? We have. We might have lost each other momentarily.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just making just making the point, David.
If anybody calls me.
Right, okay, I understand. You'll get momentarily disconnected. I just wanted to make the point, in the interest of absolute fairness, Buffett is not here to defend himself. He's never been charged with anything. He's never been arrested. He's never been interviewed under caution. He's never been before. Journalists have never connected him to any of this sort of stuff. So what David is saying is David's opinion. And David is saying he was there and he was aware of this, but Buffett has not been asked any of these questions before, and he's not here to defend himself. So I must just say that in the interest of absolute fairness. But carry on,
that's
David.
True. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. And that's the thing, is that the high people that were involved, none of them were ever charged. None of them were ever charged,
or even questioned.
Or even questioned. There was, in Omaha, Nebraska, when you look at it, Robert Wadman, who was the Omaha chief of police, he has been mentioned. He has been accused. At the time of Franklin credit, a girl by the name of Alicia Owen came forward claiming that she was pregnant with his child and she was a minor. And so it was heavily involved. I mean, the police were involved, politicians were involved, media people were involved. But Omaha is just an example of how it's like everywhere.
Why were they
That's
so
how it
sure,
works.
David? Why were they so confident that they would never be discovered? I'm amazed by this. I mean, we know that Edward Heath, the former British Prime Minister, was complicit in the rape and possibly the murder of children in Jersey, in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister, we know this now, and yet nothing apart from David Icke writing about Heath back in the 1990s, when Heath was still alive, it must be said. Nobody ever came after any of these people to ask them any questions. Why do you think they were so safe, so comfortable with doing what they were doing, and that they never really feared being detected? Why?
The issue with it is that most of us, I won't say all of it, but the majority of the population on the planet does not comprehend what it's like to have the money to buy and sell and do whatever you want and get away with it. We just don't have the comprehension. We all go to jobs, we all work, we pay the bills. The majority of us live from paycheck to paycheck, and we have no idea what it is like to have billions of dollars to just buy and sell anybody that we need. And that's why we're seeing this whole situation happen, because these people were very well connected. That this whole situation was incredibly well connected. We just had another example of this in America with Jerry Sandusky. Jerry Sandusky was a assistant coach at Penn State. He was having sex with boys. He was running around controlling a child's charity called Second Mile High Club. It was a child's foundation. When he got charged, there were all kinds of allegations that he was selling children from this foundation to elite pedophiles. But the minute he got charged, all of those charges got dropped. Well, obviously, Jerry Sandusky did not work alone. 4 years before Jerry Sandusky got charged, there was a man by the name of Ray Gricar. He was a prosecuting attorney who was investigating Jerry Sandusky and Penn State. And this man disappeared. He's never been found. And he disappeared with the hard drive from his laptop. Not his laptop, just the hard
Just a
drive.
hard drive.
And has never been heard from again. So unless you believe that Jerry Sandusky killed Ray Gricar, it shows that there's more to the story and there's more people involved than just Jerry Sandusky. But we see this, I mean, the UK, we're seeing this. You guys have a historic cover-up. The same time that these allegations came out in America in the 80s, the UK also had the exact same type of allegations come out. And now we know for certain that there was a cover-up.
They were always around, David. Those allegations were always around. Yes, they were in the 80s about certain politicians, about certain, government ministers, about certain wealthy businessmen and women. They were always around, but nobody ever did anything. And I suppose we're segueing now into the absolutely incredible reality of what Jimmy Savile was doing
and that's
undetected.
Jimmy Savile, Lord Janner. And what I have a problem with right now is in the UK, the only focus are all the dead guys. That's the only focus. But this is ongoing, and there were way more people than just those two. I mean, this has been ongoing, and you can see that now. Because they've all been called a hoax. It was called a hoax in the UK when it came out in the 80s, even though we all know that there was a cover-up, and everyone wants to focus on who, but my focus is exactly what got covered up and why did it get covered up. Those are the two questions that nobody ever asks. And right now, it's happening that they're you guys are starting to get a little bit more people generating interest in this whole situation, and people are still thinking, oh, it's a hoax. Well, the reason why everyone thinks it's a hoax is because in the United States, in 92, when McMartin came out, an organization called False Memory Syndrome Foundation was designed. It was a CIA-based group of people. The interesting part about this is that everyone who founded the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was an accused pedophile. Every single one had been accused by their children of the same crimes they say don't exist. The only person that wasn't was, I forget his name, but he went on Patica magazine. I have that on my blog. You can read the whole interview. But he went on, and he was a founder of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and he went on Patica magazine and told them how great it was for children to have sex with adults and how it didn't hurt them and how we should all accept it. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. Now allegations are coming out and people are saying, oh, it's a hoax. But my question is, if it's a hoax, why is the royal family passing laws to gag everybody and safeguard themselves from any allegations? If this is a hoax, why bother? I mean, if it's all a bunch of lies, why bother to protect yourself?
You know, David, one of the most incredible things to consider is that when the Savile revelations were made a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, and we learned what Savile was up to, everybody knew for a long time that one of his closest friends, somebody he spent a lot of time with socially, was the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, the future King of England. What's absolutely extraordinary is that at no time did any CID detective, any Scotland Yard official seek an audience with Prince Charles to ask him, what he might have heard, what he might have known. Did you ever hear anything? Can you tell us anything about Savile? He was exempt from any scrutiny. That's extraordinary. I don't care whether you're the future King of England or whether you're somebody who sweeps the streets for a living. It doesn't matter. You are somebody we would describe as a person of interest. You should be spoken to. And yet there was never any talk of that.
Well, you also have Prince Andrew. And Prince Andrew, they have connected Prince Andrew completely with a billionaire pedophile named Jeffrey Epstein. Prince Andrew has been named. Bill Clinton has been named. This man was convicted of having sex with kids, and he was giving
a
kids
close personal
to
friend. Yeah.
And so these are all connections, and nobody is putting these together. The thing that interests me about the UK is that before Jimmy Savile died, you guys had a huge controversy with Rupert Murdoch because they were eavesdropping on every single one of your celebrities there. That's
right. Yeah, we're talking about the phone hacking scandal. Yeah. How did they not know about Savile?
How is it that your biggest celebrity didn't get found out when he was alive? They're spying on everybody, but nobody knew about Jimmy Savile?
It's a fantastic question. It really is, considering that Fleet Street journalists were hacking into the phones of some of the biggest celebrities in the country, and nobody was able to come up with any evidence or to discover the story in terms of what Jimmy Savile was doing. It's a great question, David. It's 23 minutes to the top of the hour. I was going to do a quick recap. David Shurter is on the line. David's book, Rabbit Hole, A Satanic Ritual Abuse Survivor's Story, is available now. Go to davidshurter.com. David is a survivor of satanic ritual abuse. He's written about his own experiences, and now he investigates episodes of this, evidence that this is going on around the world. And there are dozens and dozens of articles and videos on his website that are well worth checking out. David, you know this, and I know you know this because you've written on your own website, you've written, you've acknowledged that people will say that you're a lunatic. Fiona Shurter is a lunatic. People who make these claims are lunatic, and you've acknowledged that people will say that. How do you speak to people who say, I just can't imagine this going on? How can a big network of people be doing this, be murdering children in such depraved ways, doing all these things? How can they remain undetected? We know there's a conspiracy of silence, but with people's natural, inclination to talk and to spread rumours and gossip, how could they have gotten away with it for so long, David?
The concentration of power is too concentrated. You have 6 corporations who own every single media in the United States. They obviously lie. Fox News just won a lawsuit with the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court told Fox News they were okay to lie. They can report whatever they want. And if it's a lie, it's a lie. And so we have what we're talking about. What most people get caught up with are the people. And how could this happen with all the people? Well, you have to take yourselves a little bit further and look at it a little bit bigger and realize it's the system. The systems are broken. And I've had people say, oh, you're crazy. You're crazy. I understand that. It is the typical first reaction because people listen to this and they become frightened. It intimidates them. They want to run from it. But there are simply too many people claiming the exact same thing. The interesting part about it is that I have a friend of mine who is doing a documentary on me, and now we're including Fiona Barnett with this, and he just watched her documentary that's on my website right now, and he called me up and said it was trippy, and I was just like, so what about it tripped you out? He said she's in Australia, she's a woman, and yet her experiences almost mirror yours exactly. And I said, that's the problem, is that you have the same people coming forward. Now, we have been told that anyone who claims satanic ritual abuse is crazy, they're liars, and all of that. Well, let's take the case of McMartin. That's the big case in America that made everything go away. We have the case of McMartin, where a preschool parents were coming forward saying that their children were being satanically ritually abused in their preschool. Well, what most people don't realize is that McMartin was one of 7 daycares just in that area alone. And the same sorts of allegations were coming out in Nebraska, in Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia was coming forward. Michigan is heavily ripe with these. So we had thousands of cases coming forward claiming the exact same thing. Everything got focused on McMartin. McMartin is the longest and most costly trial in America in its day. It was the longest and most costly trial. And yet the tunnels that the children said they were being abused in, that their satanic rituals that were going on, weren't discovered until after the trial. And the only reason they got discovered is because a group of people decided to do an archaeological dig. They were given 3 days to do an archaeological dig. They found the tunnels, they found dead animal bones, and they found satanic relics.
And that corroborated the children's story, of course.
And it totally collaborated.
Yeah.
So the question is, how was that key piece of evidence kept out of the longest and most costly trial in America? Why didn't that come out? I mean, they obviously searched the preschool. You're telling me they couldn't find the tunnels that the children were talking about? It was left out deliberately. And now the UK is starting to reenact the McMartin case with the Hampstead case.
Now, can I just stop you there for a sec, because I want to do a quick recap, and then we'll have a quick chat then about the Hampstead case in the 10 minutes that we have left, 15 minutes that we have left. Before I do that, though, I've had a message from Paul Riley. Paul, how are you? Paul, I think you might be being a tad sensitive. Paul is annoyed at my emphasis on the fact that Lawrence E. King was black. 2 reasons for mentioning that Lawrence King was black. Of course, it doesn't matter whether he was black or green or blue or white at all. But the most important reason, maybe I didn't emphasise it, but I should have emphasised it, is King was probably the highest ranking African-American member of the Republican Party. He had a very unusual an unusually close relationship with the upper echelons of the party for an African American man. That's why it's important to emphasise that. And second of all, while I didn't say Larry King, on a television show a couple of years ago, I did say Larry King because he was known as Larry King, and my producer nearly had a heart attack and said, "Oh, Richie, you better emphasise it isn't Larry King, the broadcaster." So Lawrence E. King, of course, it doesn't matter what ethnic background he comes from, but in the interest, for people who don't know the story, it is interesting to mention he's African American black because of the levels of the Republican Party that he was able to access. Very unusual back in the 1980s. Just thought I'd point that out. David Shurter is on the line. Go to davidshurter.com. We're talking about satanic ritualistic child abuse, how common it is around the world, how many stories you hear from people around the world that are similar in terms of the horrific rituals they are describing. Now, you, David, have taken a big interest in the claims made by two children in Hampstead in London, which were the subject of probably the most sensational YouTube video ever seen by anybody. Two beautiful young children talking about horrific scenes that they claimed they witnessed, scenes of murder, scenes of torture. The children are now in the care of the state. The media, in the form of the Daily Mail in Britain, has basically labelled the child's mother and her partner as basically lunatics and as lawyers. A judge looked into the case, allegedly looked into the case, looked at the facts and said no, it couldn't possibly have happened. But you've been looking into it for quite a while, and I know you've spoken to Ella Draper and to her partner. What are your thoughts on the claims made by those children, David?
I believe the children. I don't believe the parents. I believe that the interesting part about Ella is that people are led to believe that she has two children. She doesn't have two children. She has three. The oldest child that she has, she abandoned to her first husband. He, from what I understand, is a money launderer for this Luciferian group. And so she either, saying that she just discovered this with her children, she is either the dumbest person who has ever walked the earth or she's a liar. Personally, what I believe, and this is what I've believed with the Hampstead case, and I've dealt a lot with everyone, the advocates, the people involved. The only person that I haven't dealt with is Ricky Dearman, and I've obviously not spoken to the children. What I believe is that there was so much focus coming forward in the UK, especially with Jimmy Savile, that they took two real survivors of satanic ritual abuse, and everything around them has been a put-up job. They were recorded. I completely believe the children. I do. They're too fluid. They're talking about concepts they couldn't understand, and they couldn't talk as fast and as comprehensively as they did had they not gone through it. But I believe that both the supporters and the detractors are all working for this little group who are elite pedophiles so that they could bring forth the children, trash Ella and Abraham, which is not hard to do because they are not good people. And so they could discredit the Hampstead case and in turn discredit all of the 19 other cases and this historic cover-up that we know happened. They have been trying to do another McMartin, only in the UK. The difference is that with the McMartin case, we didn't have the internet. Now we have the internet. That changes everything because people can talk face-to-face, globally, instantaneously, and share ideas and all of that stuff. And so I personally believe that they took these kids, brought them forward. I mean, they were trying to dissuade from, I mean, a good case that I have worked with as well is the Holly Gregg case.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
The Down syndrome girl who spoke about being abused and that she got an STD and she was being satanically ritually abused. They're trying to sway all of the information away from all of that and focus it solely on the Hampstead case. And it's been made to be a circus. You know, anybody who just looks at the surface of it, it's a circus and you can't believe anything. And I believe that's being done intentionally but I believe sincerely those children are telling the truth. And we had a victory because those children were supposed to be given back to their father the 1st of February. And social services told both of the parents that there is so much of a global focus on this case that those kids aren't going anywhere. They're staying in foster care. And I know we can all say stuff what we want about foster care, but it is important to add that the boy came forward, and when they had him interviewed with the foster parents, he was clinging to his foster mother and said that he only felt safe with her. And so those children are way safer. I don't want them to go back to the father who they've accused of making them, putting them up for gang rapes and murdering kids and slaughtering animals and all of that. But I also don't want to see them go back to the mother with her ex-felon pothead boyfriend who is just off his rocker.
I've never come across anything like it in all my life. When we first saw the videos, obviously some of the audience of this program were clamoring for us to get people on. And, as a responsible broadcaster, some of our audience might not like hearing this, but you've got a responsibility not to just put people on the air unless you have some idea or some semblance of an idea that they're telling the truth. And we just couldn't touch it. I didn't feel right. I've come through... There's a lot to be said for mainstream media. While the mainstream media is owned, while it's corrupt, while it's perverted, the ideas of journalism at the very beginning of journalism, the ideas were good. Find out some facts and communicate them to your audience or to your readers and double check them and be absolutely diligent in your research. A lot of those standards, of course, they don't exist anymore in the mainstream media, but they need to be applied in the independent media. And I kind of didn't want to get involved with it. Sabine McNeill came on the programme to say she was convinced the children were telling the truth. I argued with Sabine. I did the devil's advocate thing and said, well, these are sensational allegations. Where's the proof? Blah, blah, blah. But like you, I was compelled by the way the children were delivering their testimony on those films. That being said, I've not got any qualifications in child psychology, David. I don't know. But my instinct tells me that the children seemed to be believing what they were saying when they were delivering that testimony. You've been through it as a boy. So you come from a completely different place to me. But to me, David, I'm thinking, what a reality to be faced with. That not on a small scale, but on a large scale, there are people doing this to children and exposing other children to it all around the world. Quite possibly, as we're talking now, you're near Seattle, I'm in Manchester in England, and quite possibly some child has been exposed to these horrors somewhere in the world tonight. What a reality, David, that is.
Most people don't understand. In the United States, the Center for Missing and Exploited Children say that a child disappears every 27 seconds in America. That's close to 800,000 children a year. Our CPS, which is our Child Protective Service, have lost tens of thousands of children who have just evaporated. And so the question is, what's happening to these children?
Where are they going? Yeah. Where are they going? Yeah. Somebody knows, David. People know.
And that's just it. No normal person knows. They can't answer the question. And what ends up happening is when you bring it up to them, it scares them so bad that they shut down. But I know the UK is having a problem because you have people who are following those PI people, and the pedophile information exchange, and they want to lower the age of consent to 4. And that's also happening in the United States. The reason why it is so important for everyone to get involved with this issue is because eventually they're going to come for your children. They are. Your children or your grandchildren are going to be caught up in this mess. And we have to figure out what's going on and stop it before that happens. Most people are so afraid. It just terrifies them.
Do you know what horrifies me? I've got to say, first of all, the paedophile information exchange allegedly doesn't exist anymore. Now, look, before you jump down my throat, David, you might say, well, it does, but it's gone underground. But for our listeners, this was a group of people in the 1970s and 1980s whom, as David said, wanted to decriminalise sex with children. These were very sinister people. In fact,
I will tell you, Richie, that 60 Minutes just did an interview. It's an Australian 60 Minutes group.
They did. Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
Lords, leaders and pedophiles or something like that can be found on YouTube. You can also find it on my site. It is still running. And they actually, at the very end of it, had an interview with the man who is running Pi right now. And in his conversation, the journalist asked him, so how does a child consent to sex? And his answer was, okay, you sit a 4-year-old girl on your lap and you tell her that her knickers are pretty. And if she likes the compliment, that's consent.
Yeah.
And he says that. You don't have to take my word for it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And Pi exists just like NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. It exists. They exist. They've just gone underground.
Like I was saying. Yeah, that's right. They're not as prevalent. We're nearly about to run out of time. I think, this year, I think we're going to be returning to this subject quite a lot, it must be said. And we'll ask you to come back on again, David. We've nearly chatted 45 minutes. It's absolutely flown by. I want to remind people to go to davidshurter.com. David's book Rabbit Hole, links on how to get it are there. This is absolutely serious. It is going on. It's going on now as we're talking on this radio program, and it's going on with the blessing of the establishment. And by the establishment, we mean the governments of the day, depending on which country you're talking about, and the authorities of the day, whether it's the police, whether it's medicine. It's going on. I cannot believe I'm saying this in 2016, nearly 20 years, well, more like 18 years into my broadcasting career, to be acknowledging that this sort of thing is happening, to be hearing stories like David's, Fiona Barnett's and others. It's truly tragic. Come back on the show again, David, in the very near future, and we'll tackle this again.
I would be honored. Anytime you want me, just ask, and I'll say yes. I'm honored. Thank you so much.
No, you shouldn't be honored. Thanks for coming on. People, get the book Rabbit Hole. Go to davidshurter.com. David, thank you, and let's do it again soon. Bye for now.
Hey, thank you.
Not at all. It's one of those things, folks, we could have given 2 hours to it. But I think less is more when you're talking about this, because I think there's still a wide body of people who listen to programs like this and listen to other programs whom they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to think or imagine that this sort of thing can be happening to children anywhere in the world, let alone in a city near them or in their own city.